They say love is blind, but betrayal has 20/20 vision. My name is Victoria Hayes, and for 27 years I believed that devotion, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty were the foundations of a successful marriage. I was wrong. The moment I watched my husband's mistress walk into our anniversary party wearing my grandmother's emerald necklace, the one I'd been searching for weeks, wasn't when I realized Marcus was having an affair. It was when I understood that my entire life had been built on a lie, and that the woman I'd become in service to others had completely disappeared. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of our 27th wedding anniversary started, like any other Saturday in our Riverside Heights home. I stood in my marble kitchen, surrounded by the soft gray cabinets I'd personally selected and the farmhouse sink I'd fought Marcus for during our renovation 3 years ago, preparing mimosas for what I thought would be a celebration of our enduring love. The October sun streamed through the bay windows, illuminating the fresh white orchids I'd arranged on the granite island, everything perfect in the way I'd trained myself to make it. My reflection caught in the stainless steel refrigerator, and I paused to smooth my honey blonde hair, noting the fine lines around my green eyes that seemed more pronounced lately. At 52, I still maintained the same figure I'd had in college, thanks to my morning yoga routine and careful attention to nutrition. Marcus often joked that I looked better now than when we'd met at Yale, though lately those compliments had become increasingly rare. The house felt enormous around me, its 5,000 square feet echoing with memories of birthday parties, holiday gatherings, and family dinners that had grown smaller as our children, Amanda and Ryan, built their own lives. Amanda was 28 now, working as a graphic designer in Boston and planning her wedding to Tyler, a sweet software engineer who treated her like she hung the moon. Ryan had just graduated from University of Vermont with his business degree and was living in Burlington, trying to decide between graduate school and joining Marcus's development company. I checked my watch, a delicate Cartier piece that had been Marcus's gift for our 15th anniversary, and felt the familiar flutter of anticipation mixed with anxiety that had become my constant companion. The party would begin at 6, and I'd spent weeks coordinating every detail with the event staff at Grandview Country Club. 200 guests, including Marcus's business associates, my interior design clients, old friends from college, and family members flying in from across the country. The theme was silver elegance to commemorate our journey toward our upcoming 30th anniversary, though we were celebrating early due to Marcus's business travel schedule. My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline Porter, my closest friend, since law school and the most successful divorce attorney in Hartford County. "Can't wait to see you sparkle tonight, gorgeous. That silver dress is going to be stunning." Caroline had insisted on taking me shopping the previous weekend, declaring that I needed something spectacular for such a milestone celebration. We'd found a gorgeous silver silk gown that hugged my curves in all the right places, elegant yet contemporary, with subtle beading that caught the light beautifully. I'd been looking forward to wearing my grandmother's emerald jewelry set with it. The necklace, earrings, and bracelet that had been passed down through 3 generations of women in my family. The emeralds were a deep, rich green that would provide the perfect pop of color against the silver dress. But despite turning my jewelry box upside down multiple times over the past 2 weeks, I couldn't locate the set anywhere. It wasn't like me to misplace something so precious, and the mystery had been gnawing at me. Marcus emerged from his home office around noon, looking distinguished in his tailored khakis and navy polo shirt. At 55, he'd maintained his athletic build through regular tennis matches at the club, and his silver hair only enhanced his appeal. He'd been the catch of our Yale class, pre-med student from old Connecticut money, captain of the rowing team, and blessed with the kind of easy charm that opened doors and won friends effortlessly. "The caterers confirmed everything for tonight," I said, wrapping my arms around his waist as he poured himself coffee from the French press. 200 confirmed guests, the band arrives at 4:30, and the photographer will be there by 5:15 to capture cocktail hour. Marcus nodded absently, his attention focused on his phone screen. Sounds perfect, Vic. You always handle these things flawlessly. The casual dismissal in his tone stung more than it should have. There was a time when Marcus would have been excited about our anniversary, when he would have surprised me with flowers or planned some romantic gesture. Now, even milestone celebrations felt like items on his business calendar to be efficiently managed. I was thinking we could steal away for a few minutes during the party, I suggested, pressing closer to him. Maybe step onto the terrace for some private time, just the two of us. We'll see how the evening flows, he replied, still not looking up from his phone. Robert Kane wants to introduce some potential investors tonight, so I might need to spend time schmoozing. I pulled back, studying his profile. It's our anniversary party, Marcus. Surely business can wait for one evening. He finally glanced at me, and I caught something in his expression. Impatience, maybe even irritation. Victoria, you know how important this expansion project is. These aren't opportunities that come along every day. I swallowed my disappointment, as I'd learned to do so many times over the years. Marcus had built Kane and Hayes Development into one of the most successful firms in Connecticut, transforming rundown properties into luxury residential and commercial spaces. His work ethic was legendary, his vision remarkable, and his success undeniable. I'd supported that success by managing our household, entertaining clients, and creating the kind of stable home environment that allowed him to focus entirely on business. The afternoon passed in a blur of preparation. I visited my hairdresser for an updo that would showcase the emerald earrings I hoped would turn up by evening, then stopped by the country club to review the final setup with the event coordinator. The ballroom looked magnificent. Round tables, draped in silver linens, centerpieces of white roses and eucalyptus, and twinkling lights that would create the perfect ambiance for dancing. Amanda called while I was driving home, her voice bright with excitement. Mom, I can't wait to see the party set up tonight. Tyler and I are leaving Boston in an hour. Did you ever find Grandma's emerald set? Not yet, sweetheart. I'm starting to think I'll have to go with the pearl set instead. That's so strange. You're always so careful with your jewelry. Maybe Dad moved it for safekeeping or something? I considered this possibility. Marcus occasionally used our bedroom safe for important documents, though he'd never shown interest in my jewelry before. I'll ask him when I get home. Well, either way, you're going to look absolutely beautiful tonight. I'm so proud of you, Mom. 27 years is incredible in today's world. Her words warmed my heart. Amanda had always been my sunshine child, optimistic and loving, quick to see the best in every situation. She'd inherited Marcus's charm and my determination, creating her own successful design business while maintaining close relationships with both Tyler's family and ours. She was everything I'd hoped to raise, independent, confident, and kind. Ryan was harder to read, more like his father in his reserve and ambition. He'd called earlier in the week to confirm his attendance, but hadn't seemed particularly enthusiastic about the celebration. I worried sometimes that our family's focus on appearances and success had put pressure on him to achieve at levels that might not align with his own interests and passions. When I arrived home, I found Marcus in the shower, humming contentedly, as hot water filled the bathroom with steam. I decided to check our bedroom safe while he was occupied, thinking perhaps he had indeed moved my jewelry there for security during the party preparations. The safe was located behind a landscape painting in our walk-in closet, its digital lock requiring a 6-digit code that Marcus had shared with me years ago. Our wedding date. Inside, I found the usual collection of important documents, some cash, and Marcus's grandfather's pocket watch, but no emerald jewelry set. What I did find, however, was something that made my blood run cold. A hotel receipt from the Marriott downtown, dated just 3 weeks ago. A dinner for two at an expensive restaurant I'd never been to. Charges for flowers from a florist I didn't recognize. The receipts were tucked behind other papers, as if someone had tried to hide them but hadn't bothered to dispose of them entirely. My hands trembled as I examined each piece of evidence. The hotel charge was for a weekend when Marcus had claimed to be at a construction site in New Haven, checking on a project timeline. The dinner receipt was from a Thursday evening when he'd told me he was working late at the office. The flowers had been purchased on a Tuesday when I'd been visiting my sister Helen in Boston. I heard the shower shut off and quickly returned, everything to its original position, closing the safe and adjusting the painting. My reflection in the closet mirror showed a woman whose face had gone pale, whose eyes held a new wariness that hadn't been there an hour before. The evidence I'd found didn't definitively prove an affair, but it certainly suggested deception on a level I'd never imagined possible. Marcus emerged from the bathroom with a towel wrapped around his waist, his hair damp and his skin flushed from the hot water. He looked younger somehow, more vibrant than I'd seen him in months. "You look beautiful already," he said, moving to his side of our California king bed where his tuxedo was laid out. "Tonight's going to be perfect." "Marcus," I began carefully, "have you seen my grandmother's emerald set? I've looked everywhere and can't seem to find it." He paused in the middle of removing cufflinks from their box, his shoulders tensing slightly. "No, I haven't seen it. Are you sure you didn't loan it to Amanda for something?" I would remember doing that. It's been in my family for generations. I'd never loan it out without making a note. "Well, I'm sure it'll turn up," he said with a casual shrug that felt dismissive. "Maybe check with the cleaning service. Sometimes things get moved during deep cleaning." I wanted to press further, to ask about the receipts I'd found, to demand explanations for the inconsistencies in his recent stories about his whereabouts. But something held me back. Perhaps years of training myself to avoid conflict, or maybe an instinctive understanding that once I asked those questions, there would be no going back to the illusion of our happy marriage. Instead, I focused on getting ready, selecting the pearl set that had been my wedding gift from Marcus's mother, Dorothy. The pearls were beautiful, but lacked the sentimental value and striking visual impact of the emeralds. As I fastened the clasp, I caught sight of my reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. The elegant silver dress fit perfectly. My hair was styled flawlessly, and my makeup had been professionally applied, yet something fundamental had shifted. The confidence and joy I'd felt that morning had been replaced by a hollow uncertainty that no amount of external beauty could mask. We arrived at Grandview Country Club fashionably late, making our entrance as the guest of honor couple to a room full of applause and warm greetings. The ballroom looked even more spectacular than I'd imagined, with soft lighting creating an intimate atmosphere despite the large crowd. Marcus immediately gravitated toward a group of his business associates, his arm around my waist as he introduced me to potential investors and their wives. I played my role perfectly, as I'd learned to do over nearly 3 decades of marriage. I smiled graciously, made appropriate small talk about home renovation projects and charity work, and complimented the other women on their dresses and jewelry. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But part of my attention remained focused on Marcus, watching for signs of the deception I now suspected, looking for clues about this secret life I was only beginning to discover. Caroline appeared at my side during a brief lull in conversation, resplendent in a deep purple gown that complemented her dark hair and olive complexion. "You look absolutely stunning, but you seem a little distracted. Everything okay?" "Just thinking about all the details," I replied, not quite ready to voice my suspicions aloud. "You know how these events can be. So much coordination involved." She studied my face with the sharp perception that made her such an effective attorney. "Victoria, We've been friends for 25 years. I know when you're putting on a brave face. What's really going on?" Before I could respond, Marcus reappeared with champagne flutes for both of us. "Ladies, I hope you're enjoying yourselves. Caroline, you look lovely as always." "Thank you, Marcus. Congratulations on reaching this milestone. 27 years is quite an achievement." "It helps when you marry your best friend," Marcus replied smoothly, raising his glass in a toast. But I noticed his eyes scanning the room even as he spoke, as if he was looking for someone specific. The evening progressed with speeches from our children, toasts from old friends, and dancing to the jazz trio I'd hired for the occasion. Amanda and Tyler looked radiant together, clearly in love and excited about their upcoming wedding. Ryan seemed more relaxed than he'd been in months, chatting easily with college friends who'd made the trip from Vermont. Dorothy, Marcus's mother, regaled anyone who would listen with stories about our wedding day and early years of marriage. It was during the third song of the evening, a slow ballad that Marcus and I had chosen for our first dance as newlyweds, that I saw her. A young woman with silky auburn hair and striking blue eyes, wearing a black cocktail dress that showed off her athletic figure. She was standing near the bar, engaged in animated conversation with Robert Kane and several other men from Marcus's company. What made my heart stop, however, wasn't her presence at our anniversary party. It was the distinctive emerald necklace that caught the light as she laughed at something Robert had said. My grandmother's necklace, the one I'd been searching for desperately. The one Marcus claimed to know nothing about. It was resting against this stranger's collarbone as if it belonged there, the deep green stones glowing against her pale skin, with an intimacy that felt like a physical blow. I stopped, dancing abruptly, my feet frozen to the polished floor despite the gentle pressure of Marcus's hand on my back. "Victoria, what's wrong?" he asked, following my gaze across the room. When his eyes found the young woman at the bar, I watched his face undergo a subtle transformation. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and a flush crept up his neck, above his collar. It was the reaction of a man who'd been caught in something he'd hoped to keep hidden. "Who is that woman wearing my grandmother's necklace?" I asked quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Marcus's pause lasted a fraction too long. "I'm not sure what you mean." "What woman?" "The redhead at the bar, auburn hair, black dress, wearing the emerald necklace that mysteriously disappeared from my jewelry box. The necklace you claimed you hadn't seen." I watched him calculate his response, weighing options and consequences in the space of a few heartbeats. "Oh, that's Natalie Brooks from the marketing department. She's been working on our promotional materials for the new development. I invited her tonight because she's been putting in long hours on the project." "And how exactly did she come to be wearing my family heirloom?" The music continued around us, other couples swaying to the romantic melody while my marriage crumbled. In real time on the dance floor. Marcus's hand tightened on mine, and I could feel perspiration forming on his palm. "Victoria, let's not make a scene. We can discuss this later." "We'll discuss it now," I said, my voice gaining strength. "How did a marketing employee from your company end up wearing jewelry that belongs to me?" He glanced around nervously, clearly aware that we were beginning to attract attention from nearby couples. "I borrowed it for a photography session. We needed elegant jewelry for some promotional shots, and I thought yours would be perfect. I forgot to mention it to you." The lie was so transparent, so obviously constructed on the spot, that it actually clarified things for me in a way the truth might not have. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a simple mistake. This was calculated deception, the kind that required planning and deliberate choices to maintain. "A photography session," I repeated slowly, "for promotional materials." "That's right. I should have asked first, but you were busy with party planning, and I didn't want to bother you with work details." I looked across the room again at Natalie Brooks, taking in details I'd missed in my initial shock. She was younger than I'd first thought, probably in her early 30s, with the kind of effortless beauty that didn't require much enhancement. But more than her appearance, it was her body language that told the real story. She moved through the crowd with confidence, accepting compliments on the necklace with a proprietary smile that suggested she considered it her own. "I think I'd like to meet this Natalie Brooks," I said, stepping away from Marcus on the dance floor. "I'd love to hear about this photography session firsthand." The color drained from Marcus's face. "Victoria, please, don't do this here, not at our anniversary party." "Our anniversary party," I echoed, feeling a bitter laugh rise in my throat. "Yes, how thoughtful of you to invite your mistress to our anniversary party and let her wear my grandmother's jewelry while she's here." "She's not my—" Marcus began, then stopped, realizing that denying the affair would require explanations he couldn't provide. I walked away from him then, leaving him standing alone on the dance floor while I made my way toward the bar with purpose and determination I hadn't felt in years. The crowd seemed to part before me, conversations pausing as people sensed drama unfolding. I was dimly aware of Caroline following me, her heels clicking urgently on the marble floor, but my focus remained fixed on the young woman who had unknowingly become the catalyst for my awakening. Natalie Brooks looked up as I approached, and I saw recognition flicker in her blue eyes. She knew who I was, which meant she knew exactly what she'd done by accepting my jewelry and attending my anniversary party. The realization that this betrayal had been deliberate, calculated, and brazenly executed gave me a clarity of purpose I'd never experienced before. "Good evening," I said pleasantly, extending my hand as if meeting any other party guest. "I'm Victoria Hayes. I don't believe we've been introduced." She hesitated for just a moment before accepting my handshake. "Natalie Brooks, congratulations on your anniversary." "Thank you. What a lovely necklace you're wearing. The emeralds are exquisite." I watched her hand move instinctively to touch the stones, a gesture that revealed both possession and guilt. "Thank you. It was a gift." "From Marcus, I assume?" The men standing nearby began to sense tension and started drifting away from our conversation, leaving Natalie and me in an increasingly isolated bubble of confrontation. Robert Kane cleared his throat uncomfortably and excused himself to refresh his drink. "I'm not sure what you're implying," Natalie said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. That necklace belonged to my grandmother, passed down to my mother, and given to me on my wedding day 27 years ago. It disappeared from my jewelry box 3 weeks ago, and now I find it around your neck at my anniversary party." Caroline appeared at my side, her attorney instincts fully activated. She took in the situation with one comprehensive glance and positioned herself slightly behind me in a gesture of support. Natalie's composure began to crack. "Look, Mrs. Hayes, I don't want any trouble. This is a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding is how long it took me to recognize what was happening in my own marriage," I replied calmly. "But that necklace belongs to me, and I'd like it back." "I can't just—" Natalie began, then stopped as she spotted Marcus, approaching rapidly, his face flushed with panic and anger. "Victoria, step away. This is neither the time nor the place for this conversation." I turned to face my husband, this man I'd loved and supported and built a life with, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The woman who had spent 27 years accommodating, compromising, and prioritizing everyone else's comfort was gone. In her place stood someone I barely recognized but instinctively respected. "Actually, Marcus, this is exactly the time and place. Our anniversary party, surrounded by everyone we know, while your mistress wears my grandmother's jewelry. I can't think of a more appropriate moment for truth-telling." The conversation around us had completely stopped now. 200 guests had become an audience for the destruction of what everyone had believed to be one of Riverside Heights' most solid marriages. Amanda appeared at the edge of my vision, her face pale with confusion and dawning horror. Ryan stood beside her, his jaw set in an expression I recognized from his childhood, the look he got when he was trying to process something that didn't make sense. "Give me the necklace," I said to Natalie, holding out my hand with steady authority. She looked desperately at Marcus, seeking guidance or rescue, but he was staring at me as if I'd become a stranger. Perhaps I had. The Victoria he'd married would never have caused a public scene, would never have prioritized her own dignity over social harmony, would never have demanded accountability from anyone, least of all him. With trembling fingers, Natalie reached behind her neck to unclasp the necklace. The emeralds seemed to catch every light in the room as she placed them in my outstretched palm, the weight of them familiar and comforting against my skin. "Thank you," I said politely, as if she'd simply returned a borrowed book rather than evidence of my husband's infidelity. The ballroom had become completely silent, except for the soft background music that continued to play, a surreal soundtrack to the collapse of my marriage. I looked around at the faces of our friends, family, and colleagues, seeing shock, sympathy, and in some cases, the guilty knowledge that I'd been the only one who hadn't known about Marcus's affair. Caroline stepped closer, her voice low but audible to those nearby. "Victoria, let's go somewhere private to talk." "No," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the silent room. "I think I've spent enough years handling difficult conversations in private. Some things deserve to be acknowledged publicly." I fastened my grandmother's necklace around my own neck, feeling the cool weight of the emeralds settle into their rightful place. Then I turned to address the room full of people who had come to celebrate what they'd believed was a successful marriage. "Thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate what I thought was 27 years of love and partnership. It appears I was mistaken about several fundamental aspects of my marriage, but I don't want your evening to be ruined by my disappointment. Please continue to enjoy the party, the music, and the company. The bar remains open, and I believe the band has several more sets planned." With that, I walked toward the exit with as much dignity as I could muster, Caroline beside me and my children hurrying to catch up. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of voices as 200 people tried to process what they'd just witnessed. But I didn't look back. The woman who would have worried about everyone else's comfort, who would have prioritized appearances over truth, who would have enabled destructive behavior to maintain the illusion of harmony, was gone forever. As we reached the country club lobby, Amanda caught my arm, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "Neither did I, sweetheart. But now we both know, and that's actually a gift, even though it doesn't feel like one, right now." Ryan appeared more shaken than I'd ever seen him. "What are you going to do?" I looked at my children, these wonderful adults I'd raised, and felt the first stirring of excitement I'd experienced in years. I'm going to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be what everyone else needs me to be. And I'm going to start tonight. The morning after our anniversary party, I woke alone in the guest bedroom of our Maple Ridge estate, my silver dress draped over the antique chair where I'd left it the night before. The emerald necklace lay coiled on the nightstand like a sleeping serpent, its stones catching the pale October sunlight that filtered through the sheer curtains. I'd moved into this room at 3 a.m. when Marcus finally returned home, his explanations and apologies falling on ears that had suddenly developed an immunity to his particular brand of charm. The house felt different somehow, as if the revelation at the country club had altered the very molecular structure of the space I'd spent 15 years perfecting. Every carefully chosen piece of furniture, every meticulously placed artwork, every color-coordinated throw pillow, now seemed to mock my blindness. How long had I been living in a museum dedicated to a marriage that existed only in my imagination? I found Marcus in his office, still wearing his tuxedo shirt from the night before, though he'd removed his bow tie and jacket. His laptop was open, and he was typing with the kind of focused intensity he usually reserved for his most challenging development projects. He looked up when I entered, his face haggard and his eyes rimmed with red. "Victoria, we need to talk." "Yes, we do." I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, the same chair where I'd sat countless times over the years to discuss household matters, vacation plans, and our children's futures. "How long?" He knew exactly what I was asking. 2 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. 2 years of deception while I'd planned dinner parties, coordinated his business entertaining, and maintained the facade of our perfect life. 2 years of lies told with the same mouth that had kissed me goodbye each morning and whispered sweet words during our increasingly rare intimate moments. Was she the first? Marcus closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, suddenly, looking every one of his 55 years. "Victoria, does it matter? Does the number change anything?" "It matters to me. I've been living in a fiction, and I'd like to understand the scope of my delusion." He was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the perfectly manicured grounds I'd spent weekends tending. "No, she wasn't the first. There have been others over the years. Nothing serious, nothing that threatened our marriage. Nothing that threatened our marriage." As if his opinion was the only one that counted. As if my knowledge and consent were irrelevant to the evaluation of our relationship's stability. I felt something cold and hard crystallize in my chest, a protective shell forming around the pain that was too vast to fully comprehend yet. "How many others?" "Victoria, please. Don't torture yourself with details that won't help anything." "I'm not torturing myself, Marcus. I'm trying to understand the truth about my own life. How many?" 5, maybe 6 over the course of our marriage. They were meaningless. Meaningless. The word echoed in my mind as I calculated the mathematics of betrayal. If he'd been unfaithful 6 times over 27 years, that meant roughly 1 affair every 4.5 years. A pattern, not impulses. A choice, not mistakes. Why Natalie? What makes her different from the others? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "She's not different. She's just the current situation." The current situation who wears my jewelry to public events. The current situation who knows enough about our marriage to attend our anniversary party. The current situation who works for your company and has access to your daily schedule. My voice remained steady, but I could feel anger building beneath the surface like pressure in a tea kettle. "It's complicated, Victoria. The jewelry was a mistake. I never intended for her to wear it to the party. But you did intend to give her my grandmother's necklace, the one that's been in my family for 3 generations, the one I wore on our wedding day." He had the grace to look ashamed. "She admired it when she saw it in a photo on my desk. I thought it would be a nice gesture. A nice gesture. My family heirloom reduced to a trinket for his mistress." I wondered if he'd told Natalie the history of those emeralds, if she knew they'd been worn by my grandmother when she married my grandfather in 1943, by my mother when she wed my father, in 1968, by me when I pledged my life to the man now sitting across from me with his excuses and justifications. "What photo on your desk?" "Our wedding photo, the one from your dressing room before the ceremony." I knew the photo he meant. It showed me in my wedding dress, my mother fastening the emerald necklace around my neck while my grandmother looked on with tears of joy in her eyes. 3 generations of women celebrating love and the promise of forever. The idea that this intimate family moment had been used to spark desire for my jewelry in another woman made me feel physically ill. "I want to see your phone." "Victoria, that's not necessary." "Your phone, Marcus, now." He hesitated, his hand moving instinctively to protect the device in his pocket. That protective gesture told me everything I needed to know about what. I'd find if I could access his messages, call logs, and photo gallery. I think you should speak with a counselor before we do anything drastic, he said instead. This is a shock, I understand that, but marriage counseling could help us work through this. Work through this, I repeated slowly. As if this is a problem we're both responsible for solving. As if my reaction to discovering your multiple affairs is the issue that needs therapeutic intervention. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. You want to manage this crisis the same way you've managed our entire marriage, by making it my responsibility to accommodate your choices and find a way to live with them. I stood up, my decision crystallizing with startling clarity. I'll be staying in the guest room indefinitely. I'll be contacting Caroline about legal options, and I'll be taking control of our financial accounts to make sure there are no more surprises waiting for me. Victoria, don't be hasty. Think about what you're throwing away. Think about our family, our reputation, our life together. I'm thinking about those things. I'm thinking about how much of our life together has been a lie. I'm thinking about what kind of example we've been setting for Amanda and Ryan. I'm thinking about whether I want to spend the next 27 years wondering who you're really with when you claim to be working late. Marcus stood as well, moving around the desk as if to embrace me or block my exit. We can fix this. I'll end things with Natalie. I'll be more transparent about my schedule. We can take that trip to Italy you've been wanting. The offer felt like an insult, as if decades of betrayal could be erased with a vacation, and some promises I had no reason to believe. More than that, his assumption that I would want to fix our marriage revealed how little he understood about what he'd actually broken. I need you to leave the house for a while. Stay at the downtown condo or get a hotel room. I need space to think without worrying about running into you in the hallway. This is my house too, Victoria. Yes, it is, which is why I'm asking you to leave voluntarily rather than forcing the issue through legal channels. Yet, the threat hung in the air between us, unspoken but understood. Marcus had built his reputation on being reasonable, charming, and diplomatic. A public legal battle would damage the image he'd carefully cultivated in Connecticut's business and social circles. After he left that afternoon with a suitcase and wounded dignity, I found myself alone in the house for the first time in months. The silence felt profound, not empty, but full of possibility. I walked through the rooms I'd decorated so carefully, seeing them now as evidence of a life I'd built around someone else's needs and preferences. The living room showcased Marcus's preference for neutral colors and clean lines. The dining room featured the mahogany table his mother had insisted we inherit, even though I'd wanted something lighter and more modern. The kitchen, while beautiful, had been designed primarily for entertaining Marcus's business associates, rather than for family cooking and casual meals. Even my own decorating business had been shaped around Marcus's schedule and social obligations. I'd chosen clients who entertained frequently, projects that would enhance our social standing, and design approaches that complemented the image Marcus wanted to project. When had I stopped asking myself what I liked, what I wanted, what would make me happy? My phone rang, interrupting my melancholy inventory. Amanda's name appeared on the screen, and I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. How do you explain to your daughter that her father isn't the man she's always believed him to be? Mom, how are you holding up? I'm processing, I said honestly. It's a lot to absorb. Tyler and I have been talking, and we want you to know that we support whatever decision you make. If you need anything at all, we're here for you. The unconditional support in her voice brought tears to my eyes. Amanda had inherited the best qualities from both Marcus and me. His charisma and intelligence, my loyalty and empathy, without the darker traits that had complicated our marriage. Thank you, sweetheart. That means everything to me. Have you talked to Ryan today? Not yet. I'm not sure what to say to him. He's really angry, Mom. He called this morning, and I've never heard him like that. He feels like Dad lied to all of us, not just you. I hadn't considered how the revelation would affect my children's relationship with their father. They'd grown up believing Marcus was an honorable man, a devoted husband, a trustworthy leader. Learning that he'd been systematically deceiving our family for years would shake their fundamental understanding of truth and reliability. I should call him. Maybe give him a little time first. He's trying to process this too, and you know how he gets when he's upset. He needs to work through his feelings before he can talk about them. After hanging up with Amanda, I found myself standing in my walk-in closet, staring at the evening gowns and cocktail dresses that comprised my social uniform. Elegant clothes chosen for charity galas, business dinners, and country club events. When was the last time I'd bought something simply because I loved it, because it made me feel beautiful or confident or joyful? I pulled out the silver dress from our anniversary party, examining it in the afternoon light. It was gorgeous, expensive, and perfectly appropriate for the wife of a successful developer. It was also completely devoid of personality, as neutral and inoffensive as I'd trained myself to become over the years, Caroline called while I was contemplating my wardrobe choices. "How are you doing, honey? I've been worried about you all day. I'm discovering that I don't know who I am when I'm not trying to be what Marcus needs me to be. That's actually a good starting point for rebuilding your life. What did he say when you confronted him?" I related the conversation, including the revelation about multiple affairs over the years. Caroline listened without interruption, her silence speaking volumes about her professional opinion of my legal position. "Victoria, I need to ask you some difficult questions, and I need you to answer honestly. Have you noticed any unusual financial activity? Large withdrawals, new accounts, significant purchases you weren't aware of?" The question hit me like a revelation. I'd been so focused on the emotional betrayal that I hadn't considered the financial implications of Marcus's affairs. Hotel, rooms, dinners, gifts, possibly even apartment rentals or other major expenses. I don't know. Marcus handles most of our investments and business accounts. I have access to our household checking and savings, but he's always managed the larger financial picture. We need to get you access to everything immediately. Bank statements, investment accounts, business finances, credit reports, everything. If he's been funding affairs for years, there could be significant financial deception as well. The possibility opened up new avenues of betrayal I hadn't considered. Was the jewelry the only gift he'd given from our home? Had he been spending our money on other women for years while I clipped coupons and comparison shopped for household expenses? I'll contact our accountant tomorrow and request copies of everything. Good. And Victoria, I need you to start documenting everything you can remember about his recent behavior. Schedule changes, unexplained absences, new patterns in his routine. If this goes to divorce court, establishing a pattern of deception will be important for settlement negotiations. Divorce court. The words felt foreign and frightening, like learning a new language I'd never expected to need. 27 years of marriage, and I was contemplating dissolving it all because I'd finally been forced to see the truth about the man I'd loved. That evening, I sat at the kitchen island with a yellow legal pad, trying to reconstruct the timeline of Marcus's recent deceptions. The business trip to New Haven that wasn't actually a business trip. The late meetings that had become increasingly frequent over the past 2 years. The weekend conference in Boston where he'd claimed cell service was poor and barely called home. The more I wrote, the clearer the pattern became. Marcus hadn't been making mistakes or exercising poor judgment. He'd been living a double life, with the same systematic approach he brought to his development projects. Every lie had been calculated, every excuse carefully constructed, every deception designed to maintain his freedom while preserving the stability of our home life. I'd been a convenient cover story, the perfect wife who managed his household and social obligations while he pursued other interests. My dedication and discretion had enabled his behavior by making it easy for him to maintain 2 separate lives without consequences. My sister Helen called just as I was finishing my timeline. "Victoria, honey, I just heard about last night. Are you okay?" Word was clearly spreading through our social circle with the efficiency of a military communication network. By now, everyone who attended the party would have shared the story with friends who hadn't been there, and the narrative would be taking on a life of its own. "I'm okay, Helen." "Better than okay, actually. I feel like I've been sleepwalking for years and I'm finally awake." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to find out who I am when I'm not trying to be the perfect wife. I'm going to make decisions based on what I want instead of what everyone else needs. And I'm probably going to get a divorce." "Good for you. I never liked Marcus anyway." "You never told me that." "What was I supposed to say? You seemed happy enough and it wasn't my place to interfere. But he always struck me as the kind of man who takes what he wants without considering the cost to other people." I thought about that observation as we talked. Marcus did have a way of assuming that his desires were more important than other people's feelings or needs. He'd expected me to accommodate his travel schedule, his business entertaining, his family obligations, and his personal preferences without question. When had I stopped expecting the same consideration from him? After hanging up with Helen, I found myself walking through the house again, this time seeing it not as a showcase for our successful marriage, but as evidence of how thoroughly I'd sublimated my own tastes and preferences. The walls were painted in Marcus's preferred neutrals. The furniture reflected his aesthetic choices. Even the artwork had been selected with his approval, chosen more for its investment potential than its emotional impact. In my home office, I discovered financial documents I'd forgotten about, records of my interior design business that I'd gradually de-emphasized as Marcus's career demanded more of my time and attention. At one point, Hayes Interiors had been thriving, with a waiting list of clients and recognition in regional design publications. But as Marcus's social obligations increased, I'd taken on fewer projects, referring potential clients to other designers rather than expanding my own practice. Looking at my business records now, I realized I'd sacrificed my professional growth for the sake of our marriage in ways I'd never fully acknowledged. Every declined project, every referred client, every design opportunity I'd passed up had been a choice to prioritize Marcus's needs over my own ambitions. The next morning brought a call from our accountant, David Morrison, requesting a meeting to discuss our financial situation. His tone was carefully neutral, but I detected an underlying concern that suggested Caroline had been right to worry about potential financial deception. "Mrs. Hayes, I think it would be beneficial if we could review your accounts together. There are some transactions I'd like to clarify with you." We scheduled a meeting for that afternoon at his office in downtown Hartford. As I drove through the familiar streets of the city where Marcus and I had built our life together, I found myself seeing everything with new eyes. The restaurant where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary was also, I now realized, the place he'd taken at least one of his mistresses. The jewelry store where he'd bought my birthday gifts might also be where he'd purchased presents for other women. David Morrison's office was located in a glass tower that housed some of Hartford's most prestigious financial firms. I'd been there many times over the years for annual tax preparation and investment reviews, always as Marcus's wife, never as an individual with my own financial interests and concerns. David greeted me with the kind of professional sympathy that suggested he'd dealt with similar situations before. "Mrs. Hayes, thank you for coming in. I've prepared a comprehensive overview of your family's financial position, and I think you'll want to understand some recent changes." He spread documents across his conference table with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. Bank statements, investment portfolios, credit card records, and business accounts created a paper landscape that told the story of our marriage in numbers and transactions. "Let's start with the household accounts," David said, pointing to statements from our joint checking and savings accounts. "These show normal patterns of deposits and withdrawals through most of this year. Your husband's salary, your business income, routine household expenses, nothing unusual. But But if we look at the business accounts for Kane and Hayes Development, there are some irregularities that concern me. He pulled out a different set of documents, these marked with yellow highlighter on specific line items. Large cash withdrawals that don't correspond to any business expenses I can identify, payments to vendors I'm not familiar with, credit card charges for items that don't appear to be business-related. The highlighted amounts were staggering. Thousands of dollars withdrawn in cash over the past 2 years, with no documentation or explanation. Restaurant charges that exceeded any reasonable business meal expense. Hotel bills for weekends when Marcus had claimed to be at construction, sites, or industry conferences. How much are we talking about in total? David consulted his calculator and several spreadsheets before answering. Approximately $75,000 in unexplained expenses over the past 24 months. That doesn't include items that might be legitimate business expenses but seem excessive or unusual. $75,000. More than I'd earned from my design business in the past 3 years combined. More than we'd spent on Amanda's college education. More than the renovation budget for our kitchen and master bathroom combined. What's our overall financial position? Fortunately, your husband has been successful enough that these expenses haven't threatened your basic financial security. Your home equity is substantial, your retirement accounts are well-funded, and the business continues to generate healthy profits. But if this pattern of unaccounted spending continues, it could become a serious problem. I stared at the documents, spread before me, trying to absorb not just the financial betrayal, but the casual disregard for our shared resources it represented. Marcus had been spending money on his affairs without any consideration for how it might affect our family's future, our children's inheritance, or my financial security. David, I need you to prepare a complete financial disclosure for my attorney. Everything you've shown me today, plus anything else that might be relevant to understanding our true financial picture. Of course, and Mrs. Hayes, if I may make a suggestion, you should consider opening individual accounts in your name only. If this situation progresses to divorce proceedings, you'll want to have financial independence and protection. That afternoon, I opened my first individual checking account in 27 years. The bank teller, a young woman probably not much older than Amanda, helped me complete the paperwork with efficient professionalism. When she handed me my temporary debit card, I felt a strange combination of liberation and terror. Will there be anything else I can help you with today, Mrs. Hayes? Actually, I'd like to change the name on the account. Not Mrs. Hayes, just Victoria Hayes. It was a small change, dropping the title that identified me primarily as someone's wife, but it felt symbolically important. I was beginning the process of rediscovering who Victoria Hayes was as an individual, separate from her roles as wife, mother, and social ornament. Driving home, I found myself taking a detour through downtown Hartford, past the offices where Marcus worked, past the restaurants where we'd celebrated anniversaries and special occasions, past the shops where I'd bought gifts for his business associates and their wives. How many of these places held memories of his secret life? How many of our shared experiences had been tainted by his deception? My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Mrs. Hayes, this is Natalie Brooks. Could we meet for coffee? I think we should talk. The audacity of the request took my breath away. The woman who had been sleeping with my husband, who had worn my family jewelry to my anniversary party, wanted to meet for coffee. As if we were friends who needed to clear up a minor misunderstanding rather than two women whose lives had been connected through betrayal and deception. I stared at the message for several minutes, my finger hovering over the delete button. What could Natalie Brooks possibly have to say that I would want to hear? What explanation or justification could she offer that would change anything about what had happened? But curiosity won out over caution. I wanted to understand how a woman could knowingly participate in the destruction of another woman's marriage. I wanted to see if she felt any remorse, or if she viewed me as nothing more than an obstacle to her relationship with Marcus. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Cafe Luna on Asylum Street, I texted back. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed that Marcus's car was parked in front of the house rather than in the garage, suggesting he was making a temporary visit rather than coming home. I found him in his office, packing files and personal items into boxes. "I thought you were staying downtown," I said from the doorway. "I am. I just needed to get some things for work." He looked up from his packing, his expression hopeful. "Victoria, I've been thinking about everything we discussed yesterday. I want to fight for our marriage. I want to prove that I can change." "You've had 27 years to prove you could be faithful, Marcus. Why would the next 27 be any different?" "Because I know what I have to lose now. Because I understand how much I've hurt you. Because I love you." The declaration of love felt hollow after everything I'd learned. How could he claim to love me while systematically betraying me for years? How could love coexist with such calculated deception? If you loved me, you wouldn't have needed multiple affairs to feel fulfilled. If you loved me, you wouldn't have given my grandmother's jewelry to another woman. If you loved me, you would have considered my feelings before making choices that affected our entire family. He set down the file he'd been holding and moved toward me, his expression earnest and pleading. "I made terrible mistakes, but they don't erase everything good we've built together. We have children, grandchildren on the way, a life that matters. We have children who are now questioning everything they believed about their father. We have a life built on lies, and I have a future I need to reclaim before it's too late." Marcus studied my face as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "You're really going to throw away 27 years of marriage?" "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally acknowledging what's been true for a long time. Our marriage has been over for years, Marcus. I've just been the only one still trying to save it." That evening, alone in the house that no longer felt like home, I found myself thinking about the woman I'd been before I became Mrs. Marcus Hayes. Victoria Catherine Morrison had been confident, ambitious, and independent. She'd graduated summa cum laude from Yale with a degree in art history and a minor in business. She'd been accepted to graduate programs in both art conservation and interior design. She'd traveled through Europe one summer, staying in hostels, and eating bread and cheese while exploring museums and cathedrals. Somewhere in the process of becoming a wife and mother, that woman had disappeared. Not all at once, but gradually, through a series of small compromises and accommodations that had seemed reasonable at the time. Moving to Connecticut instead of New York for Marcus's career. Postponing graduate school when I got pregnant with Amanda. Scaling back my design business when Marcus's entertaining obligations increased. Each choice had made sense individually, but collectively they'd created a life that barely resembled the one I'd imagined for myself at 25. I'd become a supporting character in someone else's story, and I'd been so busy managing the details of our shared life that I'd forgotten to ask whether it was the life I actually wanted to be living. Tomorrow I would meet with Natalie Brooks and try to understand her perspective on the destruction of my marriage. Tomorrow I would begin making decisions based on my own desires rather than everyone else's expectations. Tomorrow I would take the first steps toward becoming Victoria Hayes again, whoever she turned out to be. But tonight, I would grieve for the woman who had believed in forever, who had trusted completely, who had given everything and thought it would be enough. She deserved to be mourned before she could be replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more careful with her heart. Cafe Luna occupied a corner building in downtown Hartford's Arts District, its exposed brick walls and industrial fixtures creating an atmosphere that was both intimate and urban. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a table near the window, where I could observe Natalie Brooks before she spotted me. The October afternoon was crisp and clear, the kind of day that had always made me feel optimistic about new beginnings. Today, however, I felt only a hollow anticipation mixed with dread. Natalie appeared precisely at 2 o'clock, her auburn hair catching the sunlight as she paused outside the cafe to check her reflection in the window. She was dressed in a navy wool dress that was both professional and flattering, her makeup subtle but expertly applied. Without my grandmother's emerald necklace, she looked younger than she had at the anniversary party, more vulnerable somehow. She spotted me immediately upon entering, her blue eyes widening slightly with what might have been surprise or fear. I'd chosen my outfit carefully for this encounter, a cream cashmere sweater and dark jeans that suggested casual confidence rather than the formal elegance I'd worn as Marcus's wife. I wanted her to see me as an individual, not just an obstacle, to her relationship. "Mrs. Hayes, thank you for agreeing to meet me," she said as she approached my table, her voice carefully modulated to convey respect without subservience. "Victoria," I corrected, "and I'm curious to hear what you think we need to discuss." She settled into the chair across from me, her movements precise and controlled. Up close, I could see the faint lines around her eyes that suggested she was older than I'd initially thought, probably in her mid-30s rather than the late 20s I'd assumed. There was also a wariness in her expression that indicated she was as uncertain about this meeting as I was. "I want to apologize for wearing your necklace to the party. That was wrong of me, and I should have refused when Marcus offered it." The apology was carefully worded, acknowledging the jewelry issue while avoiding any admission of guilt about the larger betrayal. I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine remorse or calculated manipulation. "But you didn't refuse. You accepted a married man's gift of another woman's family heirloom and wore it to that woman's anniversary celebration. I'm trying to understand the thought process behind those choices." Natalie's composure wavered slightly, a flush creeping up her neck above the collar of her dress. "It wasn't supposed to happen that way. Marcus said you wouldn't be wearing the emeralds that night, that you'd chosen different jewelry for the dress. He said it would be meaningful for me to wear something that represented the significance of our relationship." The explanation was worse than I'd imagined. Marcus hadn't simply given away my jewelry carelessly. He'd deliberately chosen it as a symbol of his commitment to another woman. The emeralds weren't just expensive baubles to him, they represented family, tradition, and permanence. Giving them to Natalie had been a declaration of intent that went far beyond a casual affair. "How long have you known Marcus?" 3 years. I started working at Kane & Hayes right after finishing my MBA at UConn. Marcus was my supervisor initially, then became a mentor as I moved into the marketing department. 3 years. Their relationship predated what Marcus had told me by a full year, which meant he'd been lying about the timeline as well as the nature of their involvement. I wondered what else he'd misrepresented about their connection. "When did your professional relationship become personal?" Natalie glanced around the cafe nervously, as if checking to see who might be listening to our conversation. "About 2 years ago. We were working late on a presentation for a major investor, and Marcus opened a bottle of wine to celebrate when we landed the contract. One thing led to another. The classic scenario of workplace seduction, made possible by proximity, shared goals, and the intoxicating effects of professional success. I'd heard similar stories from friends who'd discovered their husbands' affairs, but experiencing it firsthand felt like watching a familiar movie with the sound turned off. Recognizable, but somehow unreal. Did you know he was married when it started? Of course I knew. Everyone at the company knows about you and your family. Marcus talks about Amanda and Ryan all the time, shows pictures from family vacations and holidays. The casualness of her response shocked me. She'd entered into a relationship with a married man while knowing about his family, while seeing evidence of his life with me every day at work. There had been no pretense or deception on Marcus's part about his marital status. "But you pursued the relationship anyway." "I didn't pursue anything," Natalie said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "Marcus made it clear that his marriage was essentially over, that you and he were staying together for appearances and the children's sake. He said you hadn't been intimate in years, that you lived like roommates rather than spouses. The lies Marcus had told about our marriage were breathtaking in their audacity and their cruelty. While I'd been working to maintain our connection, planning romantic dinners and initiating physical intimacy, he'd been telling another woman that our relationship was dead. While I'd been proudly introducing him as my beloved husband at social events, he'd been portraying me as a convenient housemate to his mistress. Marcus told you our marriage was over? He said you were both waiting for Ryan to finish college before filing for divorce. He made it sound like a mutual decision, something you'd both accepted. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. Ryan had graduated from Vermont 4 months ago, which meant that according to Marcus's timeline, we should have already begun divorce proceedings. Instead, I'd been planning our anniversary party and looking forward to the next phase of our marriage as empty nesters. Did he mention that we were planning a trip to Italy for our 30th anniversary? Or that we'd been discussing buying a vacation home in Martha's Vineyard? These are not conversations people have when they're planning to divorce. Natalie's confidence began to crumble, her carefully maintained composure giving way to confusion and growing distress. He never mentioned any of those things. He said you were focused on your design business and social obligations, that you didn't really need him in your life anymore. Each revelation made it clearer that Marcus had been living multiple lives with such skill that none of us had seen the complete picture. He'd convinced me that our marriage was solid while telling Natalie it was over. He'd made me believe his late nights were about business while using them to build a relationship with another woman. He'd presented himself as a devoted family man to our social circle, while portraying himself as an essentially single man to his lover. Natalie, what did you think was going to happen? Even if Marcus was telling you the truth about our marriage being over, what was your endgame? She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her untouched coffee as if it might contain answers to questions she'd never allowed herself to ask. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I thought we would be together, eventually. Marcus said once the divorce was finalized, we could go public with our relationship. He talked about traveling together, maybe even getting married someday. He made me believe I was the love of his life, that everything else was just obligation and duty. The love of his life. The same words Marcus had used to describe me during his wedding vows 27 years ago. The same phrase he'd whispered during intimate moments throughout our marriage. I wondered how many women had been told they were the love of Marcus, Hayes's life, how many had believed they were special and chosen and destined for happiness with him. Did he ever give you other gifts besides the necklace? A few things over the years, jewelry, flowers, dinners at nice restaurants, nothing too expensive or obvious. She paused, then added with obvious reluctance, he rented an apartment, downtown where we could meet privately, a small place in the Arts District, another apartment, another expense that explained the $75,000 in unaccounted business spending David Morrison had identified. Marcus hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been maintaining a second household, creating a complete alternate life with Natalie that paralleled his marriage to me. How often did you see each other? 2 or 3 times a week, usually. Sometimes for lunch during work hours. Sometimes in the evenings when he told you he was working late. Weekends occasionally, when he said he had business trips or golf tournaments. The frequency of their encounters meant that Marcus had been dividing his time almost equally between his 2 lives. Every late night at the office, every weekend business trip, every social obligation he'd declined to attend with me had potentially been time spent with Natalie. Our marriage hadn't been gradually deteriorating due to natural drift or incompatibility. It had been systematically undermined by his commitment to another relationship. The night of our anniversary party, why did you agree to attend? You must have known how inappropriate it was. Natalie's composure finally cracked completely, tears spilling down her cheeks as she struggled to maintain her voice. Marcus insisted that I come. He said it was important for me to meet his business associates, that it would help my career. He said you knew about our relationship and were okay with it, that you'd agreed to keep up appearances for the sake of your social standing. The depth of Marcus's manipulation was staggering. He'd convinced Natalie that I was a willing participant in some sophisticated arrangement where we all pretended to be something we weren't for the benefit of appearances. He'd made her believe that wearing my jewelry and attending my anniversary party was acceptable behavior that I'd somehow sanctioned. Natalie, I knew nothing about your relationship until I saw you wearing my necklace that night. Nothing. Marcus told me you were a marketing employee who'd been working long hours on a project. I thought you were just another business associate, attending our celebration. The horror on her face was unmistakable as she realized how completely she'd been deceived. Marcus hadn't just lied to me about his affair. He'd lied to her about my knowledge and consent. He'd manipulated both of us into a situation where we were bound to discover the truth in the most humiliating and painful way possible. "Oh my God," she whispered, covering her face with her hands. "I never would have come if I'd known. I never would have worn the necklace. I thought you were being incredibly gracious about an impossible situation." For the first time since discovering Marcus's betrayal, I felt something approaching sympathy for Natalie Brooks. She'd been as much a victim of his deception as I had, manipulated into believing a story that served his interests while protecting him from consequences. The anger I'd been nursing toward her began to shift toward a more complex mixture of emotions that included pity and shared outrage. "What happens now?" she asked, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "With your marriage? With Marcus? With everything?" "I'm filing for divorce. I'm taking control of our financial accounts to prevent any more unauthorized spending. And I'm reclaiming the life I gave up to support a man who was never worthy of that sacrifice." "And us? Marcus and me?" I studied her face, seeing for the first time not the predatory other woman I'd imagined, but a confused and betrayed person who'd been used as thoroughly as I had. "That's between you and Marcus. But I'd suggest you ask yourself whether you can trust a man who lied to both of us so extensively for so long." Natalie nodded slowly, seeming to absorb the implications of what we'd discussed. "I'm sorry, Victoria. I'm sorry for all of it. I know that doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that I never intended to hurt you." "I believe you. But intentions don't always matter as much as we'd like them to. The hurt is the same, regardless of whether it was deliberate." After Natalie left the cafe, I remained at my table for another hour, watching the afternoon foot traffic and trying to process the new information I'd gained. Marcus's betrayal was even more extensive and calculated than I'd initially understood. He hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd been living a completely fabricated existence, telling different stories to different people to maintain multiple relationships simultaneously. The skill required for such sustained deception was almost impressive in its thoroughness. Marcus had managed work schedules, social calendars, financial accounts, and emotional commitments across two separate lives for years, without either Natalie or me discovering the truth. He'd become a master of compartmentalization, keeping each relationship isolated from the other while extracting what he needed from both. My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. "How did the meeting go? Call me when you're ready to talk." Instead of calling, I drove directly to Caroline's office in downtown Hartford. Porter and Associates occupied 2 floors of a renovated Victorian mansion that had been converted into professional suites, its original architectural details preserved. Amid modern furnishings and technology, Caroline's personal office reflected both her success and her aesthetic sensibilities: rich fabrics, contemporary art, and windows that looked out onto a small garden courtyard. "You look like someone who's been through an emotional ringer," Caroline observed as I settled into the client chair across from her desk. What did the mistress have to say for herself? I related the entire conversation, including Natalie's revelations about the timeline of their relationship, the apartment Marcus had rented, and the lies he'd told each of us about the other. Caroline took notes as I spoke, her expression growing increasingly grim. Victoria, this is worse than I initially thought. The level of financial deception, the systematic lying, the manipulation of both parties. This isn't just infidelity. This is fraud. Fraud? Marcus used marital assets to fund an extramarital relationship without your knowledge or consent. He established a separate household using business funds, which could constitute embezzlement if he's a partner in the development company. And he obtained your consent to social situations under false pretenses by lying about the nature of his relationship with Natalie. The legal implications of Marcus's behavior were becoming clearer, adding another layer of betrayal to an already devastating situation. He hadn't just broken his marriage vows, he'd potentially committed crimes in the process of maintaining his double life. What are my options? Several, and they're all good for you. Connecticut is a no-fault divorce state, which means we don't have to prove adultery to dissolve the marriage. But the financial deception gives us significant leverage in settlement. Negotiations. We can argue for a larger share of marital assets to compensate for the money he spent on his affair. Caroline pulled out a thick folder and spread documents across her desk. I've been researching your financial situation based on the information you provided from David Morrison. Your husband's business has been very successful, which means there are substantial assets to divide. The house, the business equity, retirement, accounts, investment portfolios. You're looking at a settlement worth several $1 million. Several $1 million. The number was abstract, almost meaningless after the emotional devastation of the past few days. I'd never thought about my marriage in financial terms, never calculated the monetary value of 27 years of partnership and support. But Caroline was right that my contributions to Marcus's success deserved recognition in any settlement. There's something else we need to discuss, Caroline continued, her tone becoming more serious. The apartment Marcus rented for his affair could be considered a marital asset, depending on how it was financed and whose name is on the lease. We need to investigate whether there are other properties or investments you don't know about. The possibility that Marcus might own property I was unaware of opened up new avenues of concern. How many other secrets were waiting to be discovered? How many other ways had he used our shared resources for his personal benefit? Caroline, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. In your professional opinion, how long do you think this has been going on? Not just the affair with Natalie, but the pattern of deception and financial manipulation. Caroline leaned back in her chair, considering the question carefully. Based on what you've told me about the business expenses, the timeline of behavioral changes, and the sophistication of the lies he told both you and Natalie, I'd estimate this pattern has been developing for at least 5 years, possibly longer. 5 years. The number hit me like a physical blow, forcing me to reconsider not just recent events, but the entire foundation of my marriage. If Caroline was right, then Marcus had been systematically deceiving me for nearly a quarter of our marriage. Every anniversary celebration, every family vacation, every intimate moment during that time had occurred while he was actively betraying our relationship. How do I tell Amanda and Ryan? Carefully and with support. Children often blame themselves when marriages end, even adult children. They need to understand that this is about their father's choices, not about anything they did or failed to do. That evening, I called both children and asked them to come home for dinner the following night. I needed to tell them about my decision to divorce their father before they heard it from other sources. News of our anniversary party confrontation was already spreading through our social circle, and it was only a matter of time before speculation became certainty. Amanda arrived first, her face etched with worry and her usual bright demeanor subdued. She embraced me tightly in the foyer, holding on longer than usual, as if she could somehow comfort away the pain she knew I was experiencing. "Mom, how are you really doing? And please don't say you're fine, because I can see that you're not. I'm discovering that I'm stronger than I thought I was, but also more naive than I should have been at my age. Ryan arrived shortly after, his expression closed and angry in a way that reminded me painfully of Marcus. He'd inherited his father's ability to compartmentalize emotions. But unlike Marcus, Ryan's reserve seemed to come from a desire to protect rather than deceive. "Dad called me today," he said without preamble. "He wants to meet for lunch tomorrow, to give me his side of the story." "You should hear what he has to say," I replied, surprising all three of us with my calm response. "You're both adults, and you deserve to understand the situation from multiple perspectives before making your own judgments." We sat in the dining room where we'd shared thousands of family meals over the years, the familiar setting providing a sense of continuity despite the chaos surrounding us. I'd prepared comfort food, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, the kind of meal that had always brought our family together during difficult times. "I need to tell you both that I've decided to file for divorce," I began, my voice steady despite the magnitude of the words. "This isn't a decision I've made lightly, and it's not something I expect you to understand immediately." Amanda's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded as if she'd been expecting this announcement. Ryan's expression remained carefully neutral, though I could see the tension in his jaw and shoulders. "Is there any chance you could work things out?" Amanda asked hopefully. "Maybe with counseling or time apart to think things through?" "Sweetheart, your father has been having affairs for years, multiple relationships with multiple women, sustained deception about his whereabouts and activities, and financial betrayal. That goes beyond anything I can forgive or forget." The stark summary of Marcus's behavior seemed to shock both children, despite everything they'd witnessed at the anniversary party. They'd known about Natalie, but the revelation about years of infidelity and financial deception painted a picture of systematic betrayal that was harder to dismiss or rationalize. "Years?" Ryan asked quietly. "At least 5, possibly longer. The woman you saw at the party was just the most recent in a pattern of behavior that your father has been hiding from all of us." We talked for 2 hours, my children asking questions I sometimes couldn't answer, and expressing emotions that ranged from anger to sadness to bewilderment. They'd grown up believing their parents had a strong marriage, a partnership built on love and mutual respect. Learning that so much of what they'd observed had been performance rather than reality forced them to reconsider their understanding of family, relationships, and trust. "What will happen to holidays and family gatherings?" Amanda asked, the practical implications of divorce beginning to occur to her. "We'll figure out new traditions that work for everyone. Change doesn't have to mean loss. Sometimes it means the opportunity to build something better and more honest." After my children left that evening, I found myself alone in the house that would soon be just a memory rather than my home. The silence felt different now, not empty but full of possibility. For the first time in years, I could make decisions based entirely on my own preferences and desires. I walked through the rooms I'd decorated so carefully, seeing them now as evidence of a life I'd built around someone else's needs and expectations. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of dismantling that life and creating something new in its place. Tomorrow, I would take the next steps toward becoming Victoria Hayes again, whoever she turned out to be without the constraints of marriage and the obligations of being Marcus's wife. But tonight, I would allow myself to grieve for the woman who had believed in forever, who had trusted completely, who had given everything and thought it would be enough. She deserved to be mourned before she could be replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more careful with her heart. 3 weeks after filing for divorce, I stood in the master bedroom of our Maple Ridge home, sorting through 27 years of accumulated possessions with the methodical precision of an archaeologist excavating a lost civilization. Caroline had advised me to document everything of value before Marcus could claim items or remove them from the house. But the process had become something more profound than legal preparation. It was an inventory of the woman I'd been, and a clearing, space for the woman I was becoming. The walk-in closet revealed the evolution of Victoria Hayes through fabric and style. Expensive evening gowns from charity galas hung beside tailored suits for business meetings, their colors muted and safe, chosen more for appropriateness than personal expression. I found myself touching each garment and asking a question I'd never considered before. Did I actually like this item, or had I purchased it because it fit the image of who I thought I should be? The answer was startling in its consistency. Nearly everything in my wardrobe had been selected to complement Marcus's preferences or to project the kind of sophisticated elegance expected of a successful developer's wife. My personal taste, whatever that might be, had been systematically suppressed in favor of creating a cohesive image that enhanced our social standing. I pulled out a vibrant turquoise dress I'd bought impulsively 3 years ago but never worn. Its bold color and flowing lines so different from my usual choices that I'd convinced myself it was impractical. Looking at it now, I realized it represented the part of me that had been steadily silenced over the years. The woman who might choose beauty over appropriateness, who might prioritize her own pleasure over others' expectations. My jewelry collection told a similar story. The safe classic pieces I wore regularly were gifts from Marcus or his mother, elegant but impersonal selections that complemented expensive clothes without making bold statements. Tucked away in a small velvet box, I found earrings I'd bought for myself during a girls' weekend in Boston 5 years ago. Unusual silver pieces with tiny dancing figures that had made me smile in the store, but had never seemed quite right. For my carefully curated image, Dr. Patricia Wells, the therapist Caroline had recommended, would have called this process reclaiming authentic self-expression. I'd been meeting with Patricia twice a week since filing the divorce papers, initially to help cope with the trauma of Marcus's betrayal, but increasingly to explore questions about identity and personal desires that I'd avoided for decades. Patricia's office was located in a converted Victorian house near downtown Hartford, its warm colors and comfortable furnishings creating an atmosphere that encouraged honest conversation. She was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, someone who'd clearly seen enough human drama to remain unshocked by even the most devastating revelations. "What surprised you most about this process so far?" she'd asked, during our previous session. "How angry I am," I'd replied without hesitation. Not just at Marcus, but at myself. For all the times I ignored my instincts, for all the compromises I made that I didn't need to make, for building my entire identity around someone else's needs. Anger can be productive when it motivates positive change. What does your anger want you to do? The question had stayed with me for days, and the answer was becoming clearer as I sorted through the physical remnants of my marriage. My anger wanted me to stop apologizing for taking up space, to stop deferring to others' opinions about my life choices, to stop making myself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort levels. My phone rang, interrupting my archaeological expedition through the closet. Amanda's name appeared on the screen, and I felt the familiar mixture of love and protectiveness that had defined my motherhood experience. "Mom, how's the packing going?" It's enlightening. I'm discovering that I apparently haven't bought myself anything I truly loved in about 15 years. "What do you mean?" I explained my revelation about the disconnect between my possessions and my actual preferences, how every purchase had been filtered through questions about appropriateness and social acceptability rather than personal joy or aesthetic pleasure. "That's so sad, Mom, but also kind of exciting, right? You get to start over and figure out what you actually like without having to worry about anyone else's opinions." Amanda's optimism was infectious, her ability to find hope in difficult circumstances a trait I'd always admired. She'd called every day since learning about the divorce, offering practical help and emotional support with a maturity that made me proud of the young woman she'd become. "Tyler and I were talking, and we want to take you shopping this weekend. Not for practical things, but for clothes and accessories that make you happy. We think you deserve to rediscover your own style." The offer touched me deeply. both for its thoughtfulness and for what it represented about my children's support during this transition. They could have chosen sides, could have tried to pressure me into reconciliation with their father, could have made my decision more difficult by expressing disapproval or disappointment. Instead, they'd embraced my choice and were actively helping me move forward. I'd love that. Fair warning, though, I might need guidance. I'm not sure I remember what my style preferences are when they're not filtered through appropriateness considerations. After hanging up with Amanda, I continued my inventory process, moving from the closet to the drawers and surfaces where I'd accumulated the small personal items that often reveal more about a person than their major possessions. I found ticket stubs from concerts Marcus had considered boring, museum brochures from exhibitions I'd wanted to see but had attended alone because he wasn't interested, and bookmarks in novels he'd deemed frivolous or unimportant. Each discovery was evidence of interests and enthusiasms I'd gradually abandoned or hidden to maintain harmony in our marriage. When had I stopped mentioning books that excited me because Marcus would dismiss them as lightweight? When had I stopped suggesting cultural activities because I knew he'd decline and I'd grown tired of attending events alone? The doorbell interrupted my discoveries, and I found Helen standing on my front porch with a bottle of wine and a determined expression. "I've come to help you pack and to make sure you're eating actual meals instead of surviving on coffee and determination," she announced, pushing past me into the foyer with the confidence of someone who'd appointed herself chief caretaker. Helen had been my anchor throughout the divorce proceedings, offering practical support and emotional steadiness without judgment or unsolicited advice. As my older sister by 3 years, she'd watched my marriage with Marcus from the beginning, and I was beginning to suspect she'd seen problems I'd been blind to for years. "Have you always known?" I asked as we settled in the kitchen with glasses of the wine she'd brought. "About Marcus, I mean. About the kind of man he really was?" Helen considered the question carefully, swirling her wine as she chose her words. "I wouldn't say I knew about the affairs specifically, but I noticed things over the years that concerned me. The way he dismissed your opinions in social settings, how he'd make decisions about your family without consulting you, the way he seemed to take your support for granted while never offering the same level of consideration in return." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you seemed happy enough, and it wasn't my place to criticize your marriage unless you asked for my opinion. But also because I wasn't sure you'd have been ready to hear it. Sometimes people need to discover truths in their own time and in their own way." Helen's observation stung because it was probably accurate. If she'd expressed concerns about Marcus during the early years of our marriage, I likely would have dismissed them as sisterly overprotectiveness or jealousy. I'd been so invested in the image of our perfect partnership that I might not have been capable of seeing evidence that contradicted that narrative. "What do you think I should do now? I mean, beyond the obvious legal and practical steps, I think you should give yourself permission to be selfish for a while. You've spent almost 3 decades putting everyone else's needs first. Maybe it's time to figure out what Victoria Hayes wants without worrying about how it affects anyone else." The concept of intentional selfishness felt foreign and slightly uncomfortable, but also intriguing. What would it feel like to make decisions based purely on my own desires? What would I choose if I didn't have to consider Marcus's preferences, social expectations, or other people's comfort levels? That evening, I called Ryan to check on how he was processing everything. His lunch with Marcus had apparently been difficult, filled with justifications and attempts to minimize the significance of the affairs. "Dad wants me to talk you out of the divorce," Ryan said bluntly. "He thinks I have some kind of special influence with you because I'm the son." "What did you tell him? That his problems with you are between the two of you and that I support whatever decision you make about your own life." I also told him that if he'd wanted to preserve his marriage, he should have thought about that before he started cheating. The maturity in Ryan's response impressed me, but I could hear the underlying hurt in his voice. Learning that his father was capable of such extensive deception had shaken his fundamental assumptions about trustworthiness and integrity. Are you okay with all of this? Really okay? Not just trying to make me feel better? Mom, I'm angry at Dad for lying to our whole family for years. I'm sad that you have to go through this pain, but I'm also proud of you for refusing to accept treatment that was beneath your dignity. You deserve better than what he was giving you. After talking with Ryan, I found myself standing in the living room I'd decorated so carefully, seeing it now as a stage set for a play I was no longer willing to perform. The neutral colors and safe furniture choices reflected a woman who'd prioritized harmony over self-expression, who'd chosen invisibility over the risk of being truly seen. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, and my heart sank when I realized it was from Marcus. Victoria, I know you don't want to talk to me, but I need you to understand that everything I did was about my own weaknesses, not about anything lacking in you. You deserved better than what I gave you. The message was clearly crafted to sound contrite and self-aware, but I could see the manipulation embedded in its apparent honesty. By framing his behavior as personal weakness rather than deliberate choice, Marcus was attempting to minimize the harm he'd caused while positioning himself as someone worthy of sympathy rather than accountability. I deleted the message without responding, recognizing that any communication would only provide him with an opportunity to practice the charm and persuasion that had enabled his deception for so long. Caroline had advised me to keep all contact, strictly through our attorneys, and I was beginning to understand the wisdom of that boundary. The next morning brought a call from David Morrison requesting another meeting to discuss additional financial discoveries. His tone suggested the news wouldn't be positive, and I felt my stomach clench with apprehension about what new betrayals might be waiting for me. David's office felt different this time, less like a professional sanctuary and more like a battlefield, where the casualties of my marriage were being cataloged and assessed. He greeted me with the kind of gentle professionalism that usually preceded difficult conversations. Victoria, I've completed a more thorough analysis of your family's financial situation, and I'm afraid there are some additional concerns we need to address. He spread new documents across the conference table, these marked with red ink that immediately suggested greater severity than the yellow highlights from our previous meeting. The apartment Marcus rented for his affair was just the beginning. I've found evidence of a second property in his name only, a cottage in Martha's Vineyard that was purchased 18 months ago. The down payment came from your joint investment account, but the monthly mortgage payments have been automatically deducted from the business account. A cottage in Martha's Vineyard, the same location where Marcus and I had discussed buying a vacation home for our retirement. While I'd been dreaming about our future together, he'd been creating a secret retreat where he could escape with his mistresses. How much did this cottage cost? $450,000. The down payment was $90,000, all of which came from marital assets that should have required your consent to access. The theft of our shared money felt like a second betrayal, compounding the emotional devastation with financial violation. Marcus hadn't just been unfaithful, he'd been systematically stealing from our joint resources to fund his secret life. There's more, David continued, his expression growing even more serious. I've found evidence of what appears to be a second bank account that Marcus opened without your knowledge. Regular deposits from the business account, totaling approximately $30,000 over the past year. What was the money used for? Based on the withdrawal patterns, probably living expenses for the Martha's Vineyard property and discretionary spending for his affairs, restaurants, hotels, gifts, travel, all the costs associated with maintaining relationships outside your marriage. The scope of Marcus's financial deception was staggering. He'd created an entire parallel financial infrastructure to support his secret life, complete with separate properties, bank accounts, and spending patterns that I'd been completely unaware of. David, I need you to be completely honest with E. How much has he stolen from our marital assets? David consulted his calculator and several spreadsheets before responding. Conservative estimate, including the cottage down payment, the secret account deposits, and the unexplained business expenses we identified previously? Approximately $250,000 over the past 3 years. $250,000. $250,000 that could have been used for our children's futures, our retirement security, or simply invested for our family's long-term benefit. Instead, Marcus had diverted it to fund his betrayals while I'd been carefully managing household expenses and limiting my own spending to maintain our family's financial stability. What are my legal options for recovering this money? Caroline will have to advise you on the specifics, but Connecticut law generally requires that marital assets be divided equitably. The fact that Marcus used significant marital funds for personal benefit without your knowledge will almost certainly work in your favor during settlement negotiations. That afternoon, I met with Caroline to review David's findings and discuss their implications for my divorce proceedings. Her office felt like a safe harbor in the storm of legal and financial complexity that my life had become. This actually strengthens your position significantly, Caroline explained as she reviewed the financial documents. Marcus's systematic misuse of marital assets demonstrates a pattern of deception that goes beyond simple infidelity. We can argue for a much larger share of the remaining assets to compensate for what he essentially stole from the marriage. How large a share? Given the evidence of financial misconduct, I think we can reasonably argue for 60 to 70% of the marital assets. The cottage alone should revert to you entirely, since it was purchased with your money without your consent. The cottage in Martha's Vineyard suddenly represented more than just another betrayal. It had become a symbol of reclaimed power and the possibility of building something new from the wreckage of my marriage. I could sell it and use the proceeds to establish my independence, or I could keep it as a retreat where I could rediscover who I was when I wasn't trying to be what someone else needed. Caroline, I want to see the cottage. I want to understand what Marcus built with my money before I decide what to do with it. That's absolutely your right. It's legally your property now, regardless of whose name is on the deed. When would you like to go? This weekend. I need to see it while it's still his secret, before it becomes part of the legal proceedings and loses its power to shock me. The drive to Martha's Vineyard felt like a pilgrimage to a shrine of betrayal, each mile bringing me closer to physical evidence of the life Marcus had been building without me. Helen insisted on accompanying me, her presence both comforting and practical. She could serve as a witness to whatever we discovered and provide emotional support if the experience proved overwhelming. The cottage was located on a quiet street, lined with weathered cedar-shingled homes, their gardens dormant for the winter but suggesting the kind of natural beauty that would be spectacular in spring and summer. Marcus's secret retreat was smaller than our Riverside Heights home but perfectly appointed, with the kind of casual elegance that commanded high prices in this exclusive market. I used the key David Morrison had located among Marcus's business papers, my hand trembling slightly as I unlocked the door to my husband's hidden life. The interior was decorated in soft blues and whites, with nautical touches that felt both cliched and genuinely charming. But what struck me most was how personal the space felt, how obviously it had been created as a love nest rather than a simple investment property. The refrigerator was stocked with expensive wine and gourmet foods. The bedroom contained women's clothing in sizes that weren't mine, cosmetics and toiletries that suggested regular female occupancy. The bathroom medicine cabinet held birth control pills prescribed to someone named Jennifer Walsh. Apparently, Natalie Brooks wasn't the only woman who'd enjoyed Marcus's Martha's Vineyard hospitality. How many women do you think he brought here? Helen asked quietly as we explored the cottage's modest rooms. Does it matter? Whether it was 2 or 10 or 20, the betrayal is the same. But privately, I found myself wondering about the other women who'd shared this space with my husband. Were they all employees from his company? Had they known about each other? Or had Marcus managed to keep them as separate and compartmentalized as he'd kept them from me? In the cottage's small home office, I found photo albums that told the story of Marcus's secret life with disturbing clarity. Pictures of him with various women at restaurants I'd never been to, on beaches where we'd never vacationed together, at parties and events that had apparently comprised a social circle I knew nothing about. One album was devoted entirely to photos of Marcus with Natalie Brooks, documenting what appeared to be a genuine relationship rather than a casual affair. They looked happy together, relaxed and affectionate in ways that were painfully familiar, from our own early years together. The realization that Marcus was capable of the kind of romantic attention and emotional investment he'd stopped offering me was perhaps more devastating than the discovery of the infidelity itself. "We should go," Helen said gently, noticing my distress as I flipped through the album pages. "You've seen enough." But I couldn't leave without taking something that would remind me of this moment, this confrontation with the full scope of what I'd been blind to for so long. I selected one photo from the album, a picture of Marcus and Natalie on what appeared to be the cottage's small deck, both of them laughing at something outside the camera's range. The photo would serve as a reminder of my own capacity for self-deception, a warning against the temptation to ignore evidence that contradicted what I wanted to believe. Never again would I allow myself to be so willfully blind to obvious truths. Driving back to Connecticut, I felt a strange sense of completion, as if visiting the cottage had been necessary to fully understand the magnitude of Marcus's betrayal. The man I'd been married to for 27 years had been living an elaborate fiction, maintaining multiple relationships and properties while convincing me that our marriage was fundamentally solid. But rather than feeling defeated by this knowledge, I found myself energized by a sense of possibility. If Marcus could create an entirely new life while remaining married to me, what might I be capable of creating now that I was free to focus entirely on my own desires and goals? The answer to that question was beginning to emerge as I planned my weekend shopping trip with Amanda and Tyler, as I considered what to do with the Martha's Vineyard cottage, as I imagined a future that belonged entirely to me. For the first time in decades, I was excited about the unknown, curious about what Victoria Hayes might become when she was no longer defined by her relationship to someone else. The transformation had begun not with the discovery of Marcus's affairs, but with my decision to stop accommodating behavior that diminished my dignity. Everything that followed, the legal proceedings, the financial investigations, the painful revelations about the scope of his deception, was simply the process of dismantling a life built on false foundations. What came next would be entirely my choice, built on truths I was only beginning to discover about my own strength, resilience, and capacity for creating genuine happiness. The woman who had worn my grandmother's emeralds to her own anniversary party while her husband's mistress claimed them was gone forever, replaced by someone I was eager to meet. 1 year after my divorce was finalized, I stood on the deck of what was now my cottage in Martha's Vineyard, watching the sunrise paint the Atlantic Ocean in shades of coral and gold. The irony wasn't lost on me that the property Marcus had, purchased as a secret retreat for his affairs, had become the sanctuary where I'd finally learned to live for myself. The cottage had been transformed from a symbol of betrayal into a testament to resilience. Its rooms now filled with books I loved, artwork that spoke to my soul, and furnishings chosen purely for the joy they brought me. The past 12 months had been a masterclass in reconstruction. The divorce settlement had awarded me 70% of our marital assets, including the Riverside Heights house, which I'd sold within 3 months of the final decree. The proceeds, combined with my share of Marcus's business equity and the recovery of the misappropriated funds, had provided me with financial security I'd never imagined possible as a single woman. But more transformative than the money had been the process of rediscovering who I was when I wasn't trying to be what everyone else needed. The woman who emerged from the wreckage of my marriage bore little resemblance to the carefully composed wife who had hosted charity luncheons and attended business dinners with practiced grace. Victoria Hayes, the individual, had opinions about everything from interior design to international politics that she'd never been encouraged to express. She preferred bold colors over neutral palettes, abstract art over traditional landscapes, and novels with complex female protagonists over the literary fiction Marcus had deemed more sophisticated. She enjoyed jazz clubs and independent films, cooking classes and hiking trails, travel destinations chosen for personal interest rather than social status. My interior design business had been reborn as well, transformed from a socially acceptable hobby into a thriving enterprise that reflected my authentic aesthetic vision. Hayes Design Studio now occupied a converted warehouse space in Hartford's Arts District, its exposed brick walls and industrial fixtures creating the kind of environment I'd always loved but had never felt confident enough to embrace. The clients who sought me out now were drawn to my willingness to take creative risks, to design spaces that prioritized personal expression over conventional beauty. My portfolio included loft apartments for young professionals, artists' studios that celebrated creative chaos, and family homes where function and whimsy coexisted in surprising harmony. The irony was that the more authentically myself I became, the more successful my business grew. Freed from the constraints of designing spaces that would impress Marcus's associates, I'd discovered a creative voice that resonated with clients who wanted their homes to reflect their true personalities rather than aspirational images. Amanda called as I was preparing breakfast in my cottage kitchen, her voice bright with the excitement that had become her default tone since her wedding 6 months ago. She and Tyler had created exactly the kind of marriage I'd thought I had with Marcus. A partnership built on genuine mutual respect, shared decision-making, and transparent communication about everything from finances to future dreams. "Mom, I have news," she announced without preamble. "We're pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother." The joy that flooded through me was pure and uncomplicated, untainted by the complex emotions that had colored so many family celebrations during my marriage. This grandchild would know me as I truly was, not as the carefully curated version of myself I'd presented for decades. "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful. How are you feeling? When is the baby due?" "I'm feeling amazing, and the baby is due in early spring." Tyler is already researching the best educational philosophies and building a crib from scratch. I think our child is going to be very well prepared for life. After congratulating Amanda and promising to help with nursery preparations, I found myself reflecting on the difference between becoming a grandmother as a married woman versus as an independent one. During my marriage, this moment would have involved consulting Marcus about our level of involvement, coordinating our schedules around his business obligations, and filtering my enthusiasm through his comfort levels with family activities. Now, I could simply embrace the joy without qualification or compromise. I could offer whatever support Amanda and Tyler needed without checking with anyone else first. I could spoil my grandchild outrageously without worrying about undermining anyone's parenting philosophy or social image. Ryan had also found his footing in the aftermath of our family's upheaval, though his journey had been more complex than his sister's. The revelation of his father's systematic deception had shaken his faith in authority figures and traditional institutions, leading him to question career paths and life choices he'd previously accepted without examination. He'd moved to Vermont, permanently, using his business degree to help launch a sustainable agriculture cooperative that provided locally grown food to restaurants throughout New England. The work combined his analytical skills with his growing passion for environmental sustainability, creating a career that reflected his values rather than his father's expectations. Our relationship had deepened considerably since the divorce, freed from the triangulated dynamics that had characterized our family interactions for years. Without Marcus serving as an intermediary who filtered and interpreted our communications, Ryan and I had discovered we genuinely enjoyed each other's company and shared more interests than we'd ever realized. He visited the cottage regularly, usually arriving with vegetables from his cooperative and staying for long weekend conversations about everything from sustainable farming practices to philosophy to his occasionally complicated relationship with his father. Marcus had attempted to maintain connections with both children, but his efforts were hampered by their newfound awareness of his capacity for manipulation and their protective loyalty toward me. Caroline had warned me that post-divorce relationships with adult children could be challenging, particularly when one parent had been clearly at fault for the marriage's destruction. But Amanda and Ryan had surprised everyone by becoming more communicative and emotionally available after the family crisis, as if the dissolution of my marriage had freed them to be more honest about their own feelings and experiences. The cottage had become a gathering place for this new version of our family, its relaxed atmosphere encouraging the kind of authentic conversation that had been impossible in the formal settings of our previous life. Amanda and Tyler spent holidays there. Ryan brought friends from his cooperative for weekend visits, and Helen had claimed the guest room as her summer retreat. Even Dorothy, Marcus's mother, had maintained a relationship with me that defied conventional post-divorce expectations. At 79, she possessed a clarity of judgment that allowed her to separate her disappointment in her son's behavior from her affection for the woman who had been part of her family for nearly 3 decades. "You were the best thing that ever happened to Marcus," she'd told me during one of her visits to the cottage. "His inability to appreciate that gift says nothing about your worth and everything about his character." Dorothy's continued presence in my life felt like a validation of the relationships I'd built during my marriage, proof that the connections formed through love and mutual respect could survive even the most devastating betrayals. She'd become an unexpected ally in my journey toward independence, sharing stories about her own struggles with traditional gender roles and encouraging my most adventurous impulses. The emotional healing had been gradual and sometimes painful, requiring me to confront not only Marcus's betrayals, but my own complicity in creating a dynamic that enabled his behavior. Dr. Patricia Wells had helped me understand that my desire to be the perfect wife had actually made it easier for Marcus to take me for granted, to assume my support would always be available regardless of how he treated me. The insight had been humbling and liberating in equal measure. I'd needed to accept responsibility for my own choices while recognizing that Marcus's deception had been entirely his decision. The work of distinguishing between reasonable self-reflection and destructive self-blame had been one of the most challenging aspects of rebuilding my life. But gradually, I'd developed a sense of my own worth that didn't depend on anyone else's validation or approval. The woman who now chose her own clothes, designed her own spaces, and made her own decisions had discovered reserves of strength and confidence that had been dormant for decades. The social adjustments had been interesting to navigate as well. Some friendships had survived the divorce easily, their foundations strong enough to weather the revelation of my marriage's true nature. Others had faded quietly, apparently dependent on social configurations that no longer existed. A few had surprised me by deepening significantly once I was free to be more authentic in my interactions. New friendships had emerged as well, formed around shared interests rather than social obligations. I'd joined a book club that met in a coffee shop near my studio, participated in a hiking group that explored New England trails every weekend, and enrolled in a painting class where my complete lack of artistic talent was offset by my enthusiasm for creative expression. The dating question arose occasionally, usually prompted by well-meaning friends who assumed that replacing Marcus should be my ultimate goal. But I discovered that being alone was completely different from being lonely, and that solitude could be chosen and cherished rather than simply endured. There had been a few dinner dates with men Caroline or Helen had introduced me to, pleasant evenings that reminded me I was still capable of enjoying male companionship without needing to build my life around it. But none had sparked the kind of interest that would motivate me to make room in my carefully crafted independence for another person's needs and preferences. Perhaps someday I'd meet someone whose presence enhanced rather than diminished my sense of self, someone who wanted to build something together rather than expecting me to accommodate myself to his existing life. But for now, I was content to explore the full extent of my own capabilities and desires without having to consider anyone else's comfort level with my choices. The financial independence had been crucial to this emotional freedom. The divorce settlement had provided me with resources I'd never controlled as a married woman, allowing me to make decisions based on personal interest rather than budget constraints or someone else's priorities. I'd learned to manage investments, understand tax implications, and plan for long-term financial security with the same attention to detail I'd once devoted to managing household expenses. The cottage renovation had been my first major independent financial decision, a project that reflected my taste and lifestyle without any need for compromise or consensus. I'd hired contractors based on their creative vision rather than their cost estimates, chosen materials for their beauty rather than their resale value, and created spaces designed for my own comfort rather than potential buyers' approval. The result was a home that felt genuinely mine for the first time in my adult life. Every paint color, every piece of furniture, every decorative object had been selected because it brought me joy or served my specific needs. The cottage had become a physical manifestation of my rediscovered autonomy, proof that I was capable of creating beauty and comfort through my own choices. 6 months ago, I'd begun volunteering with a local organization that provided support, services for women navigating divorce after long marriages. The work had started as a way to give back to the community that had supported me during my own transition, but it had evolved into something more personally meaningful. The women I met through the support group reminded me of my own journey, while also highlighting how different each person's path to independence could be. Some were dealing with financial abuse that made my situation seem straightforward by comparison. Others were struggling with custody issues involving minor children. A few were facing health challenges that complicated their ability to rebuild their lives. But all of them shared the common experience of discovering that the marriages they'd invested in were fundamentally different from what they'd believed them to be. The shock of that realization, regardless of the specific circumstances, created a bond that transcended differences in age, background, or financial resources. My role in the group was partly practical, helping women understand their legal options and financial rights, and partly emotional, serving as living proof that life after a devastating betrayal could be not just survivable, but genuinely fulfilling. The conversations we shared were raw and honest in ways that my previous social interactions had never been, stripped of the pretense and image management that had characterized so much of my married life. "What's the most important thing you've learned?" asked Maria, a 45-year-old teacher whose husband had left her for a woman 20 years younger after emptying their savings account. "That I'm responsible for my own happiness," I replied. "For too many years, I thought my job was to make everyone else comfortable and content, and I expected that eventually someone would return the favor. But happiness isn't something you earn through service to others. It's something you create through honest choices about your own life." The wisdom felt hard-won rather than naturally acquired, the result of painful experience rather than theoretical understanding. But it was mine in a way that borrowed insights never could be. And sharing it with other women gave my own journey a sense of purpose that extended beyond personal recovery. Amanda visited the cottage regularly now, often bringing Tyler and always marveling at the changes in both the space and in me. "You seem so much more yourself than you ever did before," she'd observed during her most recent visit. "Like you're finally comfortable in your own skin." The observation was accurate, in ways that were both simple and profound. The woman who had spent decades monitoring her words and actions for their impact on others had been replaced by someone who spoke honestly and acted authentically, regardless of whether her choices met with universal approval. This morning, as I prepared to drive back to Hartford for a client meeting that would likely result in my largest design contract to date, I felt the same sense of anticipation and possibility that had become my default emotional state. The future stretched ahead like an uncharted territory, full of opportunities to discover new aspects of myself and new ways of contributing to the world. The divorce papers I'd given Natalie Brooks that night at the anniversary party had been more than just legal documents. They'd been a declaration of independence from a life built on compromise and accommodation. The woman who had worn my grandmother's emeralds while claiming my husband had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible, the shock necessary to wake me from a decades-long sleep. Today, Those same emeralds rested in a jewelry box in my cottage bedroom, waiting for the right occasion to be worn again. When that moment came, they would adorn a woman who understood her own worth, who made her own choices, and who would never again mistake being needed for being loved. The story that had begun with betrayal and humiliation had transformed into something entirely different. A tale of resilience, rediscovery, and the remarkable things that become possible when we finally decide to stop settling for less than we deserve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.